So Eleanor, my daughter-in-law said as she lifted her champagne glass high enough for the entire restaurant to hear. The woman funding all our futures. Everyone at the table laughed. Even my son. I smiled softly and lowered my eyes to my plate, as if the joke hadn't landed like a knife between my ribs. The waiter had just placed a stack of blueberry pancakes in front of me, still steaming, with powdered sugar melting into the butter. Around us, the Mother's Day brunch crowd buzzed with laughter and clinking silverware beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Marlowe Hotel in downtown Portland. A piano player near the windows moved gently through old jazz standards while servers carried trays of mimosas from table to table. It should have felt warm, celebratory. Instead, I felt strangely cold. Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed Daniel's arm dramatically. "I'm serious," she continued with another laugh. "With the lake house, the investment accounts, and this beautiful condo, we should all be set for retirement." Chloe giggled from beside her mother, though at 16, I doubted she fully understood the conversation. Daniel smirked into his coffee cup. "Mom always did know how to save money." I folded my napkin twice because suddenly my hands wouldn't stop trembling. For a moment, I told myself they were only joking. Families tease each other sometimes. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe grief had made me fragile. My husband Walter had been gone for 3 years now, but certain days still opened the wound all over again. Mother's Day had always been difficult since losing him. He used to bring me yellow roses every year, even when we were barely scraping by in our 20s. I could still hear his voice teasing me for crying during sentimental commercials and overcooking the bacon every Sunday morning. Walter used to say a family should make you feel safe. Sitting there at that polished white table surrounded by expensive handbags and half-finished cocktails, I had never felt less safe in my life. Vanessa adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one I had paid for last Christmas, after she casually mentioned how much she loved it while we were shopping together. "Honestly," she said, swirling her mimosa, "Eleanor deserves to enjoy her money while she's alive. But eventually someone has to manage all those properties." Her eyes flickered toward me briefly before she smiled again. "I just hope we don't have to fight the IRS too much when the time comes." Another laugh. Softer this time. Daniel didn't stop her. He didn't even look uncomfortable. That hurt more than anything else. My son used to hold my hand crossing parking lots when he was little because he thought I might get lost. Now he sat 3 feet away while his wife discussed my death over Eggs Benedict. I reached for my teacup slowly. The porcelain rattled lightly against the saucer. Across the dining room, sunlight poured through towering windows overlooking the harbor, turning the water silver. Outside, couples walked hand in hand along the marina in light spring jackets while sailboats drifted lazily in the distance. Portland always looked beautiful in May. Walter and I had spent 38 years building our life there. We bought our first tiny duplex when Daniel was 4 years old and slowly turned one property into 2, then 3, then eventually an entire portfolio of rental buildings across southern Maine. There were years we survived on canned soup and stale bread because every extra dollar went into repairs or mortgages. I still remembered painting apartment walls at midnight after finishing shifts at the pharmacy. Walter handled plumbing. I handled bookkeeping. We sacrificed vacations, new cars, and almost every luxury imaginable because we wanted Daniel to have stability we never had growing up. And now my sacrifices had somehow become their financial plan. "Grandma," Chloe suddenly asked while scrolling on her phone, "when you move into one of those retirement communities, can Mom and Dad finally renovate the lake house?" The room went strangely quiet after that. Vanessa's smile froze for half a second. Daniel cleared his throat and reached for his water glass too quickly. Chloe blinked innocently. "What?" she asked. "Dad said the kitchen renovation would happen after Grandma downsizes." I looked at my son then. Really looked at him. His hair had started graying around the temples recently, just like Walter's had in his 40s. He wore the navy sweater I bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. The same little scar rested near his chin from when he fell off his bike at age 9 and cried into my shoulder all night. For one terrible second, I still saw the little boy I once knew. Then he avoided my eyes entirely. "We were just talking hypothetically," Daniel muttered. Vanessa laughed too loudly. "Teenagers repeat everything, don't they?" But something had shifted inside me already. Not dramatically, not angrily, quietly, like a door softly closing somewhere deep in my chest. I stirred my tea even though I no longer wanted it. Around me, brunch continued as normal. Servers smiled politely. Glasses clinked. Someone across the room celebrated a birthday while cameras flashed. But every sentence at our table suddenly sounded different. Sharper. More calculated. Vanessa began discussing property taxes. Daniel mentioned maintenance costs on large homes. Chloe talked excitedly about wanting a bedroom overlooking the lake someday. And through it all, they spoke as though my future had already been decided without me. I smiled when appropriate, nodded occasionally, played my role perfectly. The gentle widowed mother, the quiet grandmother, the woman too polite to ruin brunch with uncomfortable emotions. But beneath that calm expression, something cold and clear had finally begun settling into place. Because while my family laughed about inheriting my life, they had no idea I'd spent the previous 3 weeks quietly meeting with my attorney every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The brunch finally ended just after 2 o'clock. Vanessa hugged me tightly before leaving, her expensive perfume lingering on my coat long after she stepped away. "We should do this again soon," she said brightly, already turning toward the valet stand before I could answer. Daniel kissed my cheek distractedly while checking emails on his phone. Chloe waved from the passenger seat of their black SUV, earbuds already back in place. I stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel watching them drive away beneath the pale gray spring sky, and for a long moment, I felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. The harbor wind carried the smell of salt water and rain as I walked slowly toward my car. Walter used to hold my elbow whenever we crossed busy downtown streets together. Even after arthritis stiffened his hands, he still reached for me automatically. Some habits survive love longer than people do. I sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes before turning the ignition. My reflection in the windshield looked older than 68 that afternoon, tired around the eyes, smaller somehow. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my condo nearly 40 minutes later, the silence inside greeted me immediately. No television, no footsteps overhead, no sound except the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking kitchen clock Walter bought at an antique store 20 years ago. I slipped off my shoes carefully and hung my coat near the door. The condo overlooked Casco Bay, and usually the view comforted me. Sailboats drifted peacefully across the water while gulls circled above the marina. But that afternoon, even the ocean felt distant. I walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator without thinking. Half a lemon, yogurt, strawberries, leftover soup, the ordinary loneliness of a person who cooks only for herself. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter while the events of brunch replayed quietly in my mind. Not the jokes themselves. It was the certainty behind them that unsettled me most. Vanessa had not sounded cruel. She had sounded confident, comfortable, as though my future already belonged to them. I carried my water to the living room and lowered myself carefully into Walter's old armchair near the windows. The leather had softened over the years, molded perfectly to the shape of his body long before it became mine. Beside the chair sat the framed photograph from our 35th wedding anniversary. Walter smiling warmly in his navy blazer. Me leaning into him beneath strings of patio lights at our lake house in Bar Harbor. Back then, Daniel still called every Sunday just to talk. Back then, Vanessa still brought homemade pies during holidays and thanked me for every small kindness. I stared at the photograph for a long time before finally reaching for my phone. There were already 3 unread messages in the family group chat. Vanessa had uploaded brunch photos. In every picture, I was smiling politely while everyone around me looked relaxed and happy. Underneath one photo, Vanessa wrote, "Celebrating the queen of the family today." A little crown emoji followed the sentence. Daniel replied with a red heart. Chloe posted, "Best brunch ever." I set the phone face down on the side table. Then, very slowly, I opened the drawer beneath the lamp and removed the folder Martin Hale had given me 3 weeks earlier. The paperwork rested exactly where I left it. Property transfer documents, charitable trust agreements, donation authorizations, all neatly organized with colored tabs Martin insisted would make everything easier to review. My fingers rested lightly on the folder cover while rain began tapping softly against the windows overlooking the bay. Walter used to say people reveal themselves most clearly when they think the future is guaranteed. Sitting alone in that quiet condo with the sound of distant thunder rolling across the water, I realized my family had already spent every dollar I owned in their minds long before I ever decided what to do with it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise the way I always did now. Age changes sleep. At 68, my body no longer believed in sleeping late, even on Sundays. Pale blue light filtered through the bedroom curtains while the rain from the night before still clung to the windows overlooking the bay. For several minutes, I remained still beneath the blankets listening to the quiet apartment around me. Walter used to snore softly beside me every morning around 5 o'clock. I missed even that. Especially that. I finally pushed myself out of bed and slipped into my robe before walking slowly toward the kitchen. The hardwood floors felt cool beneath my feet. I brewed coffee the old-fashioned way because Walter always claimed machines ruined the taste. The familiar smell filled the condo within minutes, warm and steady against the silence. I carried my mug toward the dining table, where yesterday's mail still sat unopened beside the floral centerpiece Vanessa had brought me 2 weeks earlier. White lilies. Expensive ones. She always chose gifts that looked thoughtful from a distance. I picked up the stack of envelopes absent-mindedly while sipping my coffee. Utility bill. Insurance statement. Advertisement for luxury senior living communities. My hand stopped there. The brochure showed smiling gray-haired couples walking along a beach beneath the words, "The Harbor Pines Lifestyle Experience." I almost laughed softly to myself. It would have seemed harmless if not for Chloe's comment at brunch. If not for the conversations about downsizing and future renovations. I opened the brochure slowly. Inside were glossy photographs of elegant apartments, yoga classes, chef-prepared meals, and waterfront walking trails. Someone had circled a floor plan in blue ink. Unit 214. 1 bedroom. Garden view. My chest tightened slightly. Daniel's handwriting had not changed much since high school. Even after all these years, I recognized the sharp slant of his letters immediately. For a long moment, I simply stared at the page while steam drifted upward from my coffee cup. Then I folded the brochure carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. I walked to the sink and stood there watching gulls sweep low across the gray morning water outside. 3 years earlier, after Walter's funeral, Daniel insisted on handling many of my errands because he said he worried about me being overwhelmed. At the time, his concern felt comforting. Loving, even. He helped organize financial papers, spoke with accountants, scheduled maintenance inspections on the rental properties. Vanessa started dropping by more often too. She brought soups I never asked for and constantly talked about how important planning ahead became at my age. Back then, I thought they were trying to protect me through grief. Now, standing alone in my kitchen with that brochure still sitting on the counter behind me, I began replaying those months differently. Certain conversations suddenly sounded rehearsed in my memory. Certain kindnesses felt strangely strategic. My phone buzzed lightly against the table. A text from Vanessa. "Yesterday was wonderful. Chloe loved seeing you. We should start discussing summer plans at the lake house soon." A second message followed almost immediately. "Daniel thinks the upstairs bathroom renovation cannot wait much longer." I looked at the words for several seconds before setting the phone down without replying. The upstairs bathroom renovation. Walter had remodeled that bathroom himself the summer before he got sick. He spent 3 weekends carefully installing pale blue tiles because I once mentioned they reminded me of the ocean in Cape Elizabeth. He measured every cabinet twice, sanded every edge by hand. Even during chemotherapy, he still insisted on finishing the trim himself because he wanted it done properly. And now Vanessa talked about renovating it as though the house already belonged to them. I walked quietly into my office near the hallway and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside rested a leather-bound folder containing every document Martin Hale and I had finalized over the past month. Donation agreements, property transfers, scholarship endowments. The final signatures were already complete. All that remained now was timing. I rested my fingertips lightly against the folder cover while rain clouds drifted slowly over Casco Bay outside my windows. Somewhere deep inside me, grief was beginning to harden into something far calmer and far more dangerous than sadness. That afternoon, I drove to Bar Harbor alone for the first time in nearly 6 months. The lake house sat exactly where it always had, tucked between tall pine trees overlooking the quiet water of Eagle Lake. Walter and I bought the property 31 years ago after one particularly brutal winter when we promised ourselves life could not be only work and bills forever. Back then, the cabin was small and weathered, with crooked porch steps and peeling paint. Walter rebuilt almost every inch of it with his own hands over the years. Every floorboard carried some memory of him. Every room held traces of our life together. The moment I unlocked the front door, the familiar scent of cedar and old books wrapped around me softly. Dust floated through thin streams of afternoon sunlight near the windows, while the lake shimmered quietly beyond the back deck. For several minutes, I simply stood there listening to the stillness. No phones ringing. No conversations about property values or renovations. Just the creaking wood settling gently beneath the spring air. I walked slowly through the living room, trailing my fingertips along the stone fireplace Walter built during the summer Daniel turned 12. I still remembered the argument we had because Walter insisted on carrying every heavy stone himself instead of hiring help. If I build it with my own hands, he told me at the time, then it becomes part of the family. I swallowed carefully at the memory. That word did not feel the same anymore. Upstairs, I paused outside the blue bathroom Vanessa wanted remodeled so badly. The pale ocean-colored tiles still looked beautiful to me. Walter spent weeks choosing the exact shade because he said it matched my eyes when I laughed near the water. I ran my hand lightly across the countertop, while memories moved quietly through me like slow waves. Daniel brushing his teeth here before fishing trips with his father. Chloe as a little girl splashing soap bubbles everywhere during summer vacations. Christmas mornings beside the fireplace with cinnamon rolls warming in the kitchen downstairs. There was love in this house once. Real love, which made what was happening now feel even sadder somehow. I opened the linen closet and found the old tackle box Walter used for fishing supplies. Inside, tucked beneath extra hooks and faded maps, rested a folded photograph I had forgotten existed. Daniel at age 14, grinning proudly beside Walter after catching his first salmon. Both of them sunburned and laughing. Walter's arm rested across our son's shoulders while Daniel leaned naturally into him with complete trust. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed holding that photograph for a very long time. Somewhere along the way, ambition and comfort had changed my son into someone I barely recognized. Or perhaps this version of him had always existed beneath the surface, and I simply never wanted to see it. Downstairs, my phone buzzed again against the kitchen counter. Vanessa, just checking if you made it to the lake safely. Another message appeared immediately afterward. Daniel and I were talking. Maybe we should all spend 4th of July there together this year. Chloe already picked out which room she wants after renovations. I stared at the message while late afternoon sunlight stretched across the wooden floors around me. Not which room she liked. Which room she wanted after renovations. As though ownership had already quietly transferred in their minds. I set the phone down beside the sink and stepped outside onto the back deck overlooking the lake. The water moved gently beneath the breeze while distant birds called through the trees. Walter used to sit out here every evening with black coffee after dinner, watching the sunset fade behind the mountains. Sometimes we barely spoke for an hour at a time. We did not need to. Peace does not always require conversation. I rested both hands against the porch railing and closed my eyes briefly against the cool wind off the lake. Then, very slowly, I made a decision. I would let them keep talking about renovations. I would let them keep imagining their future here. And when the time finally came, the truth would arrive all at once. 2 days later, I met Judith Carter for lunch at a small seafood restaurant near the waterfront in Camden. Judith and I had known each other since our 20s, back when both of us were exhausted young mothers clipping coupons and stretching every dollar as far as possible. She was one of the few people left in my life who still spoke to me honestly instead of carefully managing every conversation. The restaurant overlooked the harbor, where lobster boats drifted quietly against the docks beneath a cloudy afternoon sky. Judith arrived wearing her usual oversized sunglasses and linen jacket, carrying enough confidence to fill the entire room before she even sat down. "You look tired," she said immediately after hugging me. Not cruelly, just truthfully. I stirred cream into my chowder and forced a small smile. Mother's Day brunch ran long. Judith raised one eyebrow slowly. "With Vanessa?" I nodded once. That was all it took. Judith leaned back in her chair and folded her napkin carefully into her lap. "What did she say this time?" The waitress arrived with iced tea before I answered. For several moments, I watched condensation slide slowly down the glass, while conversations buzzed softly around us. Finally, I repeated the joke Vanessa made about me funding their future. I repeated Chloe's comments about renovations and retirement communities. I repeated everything exactly as it happened, right down to Daniel's silence. Judith did not interrupt once. She only listened while her expression hardened gradually with every sentence. When I finally stopped talking, she let out a slow breath through her nose. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "they are not waiting for you to live. They are waiting for you to leave." The sentence settled heavily between us. Outside the windows, gulls circled low over the harbor while rain clouds thickened above the water. I stared down at my untouched soup. Maybe I failed somewhere with Daniel, I admitted softly. Saying the words out loud hurt more than I expected. Judith shook her head immediately. "No, you loved him too much to imagine he could become this entitled." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "There is a difference." I looked away toward the harbor because suddenly my eyes burned. Judith had lost her own husband years before Walter passed away, and grief had sharpened her understanding of people in ways that felt almost uncomfortable sometimes. After Frank died, she continued carefully, I learned something ugly. Some people see widows as temporary caretakers of future money. They become patient investors in your death. I almost flinched at the bluntness of the sentence. But deep down, I knew she was right. The waitress returned to refill our drinks while Judith changed the subject briefly, asking about the lake house and whether I planned to spend the summer there again. I told her about Vanessa discussing renovations before anyone had even asked me what I wanted. Judith laughed softly without humor. She already decorated the place in her head. Then her expression shifted slightly. "Have you spoken with Martin recently?" I nodded slowly. "Every Tuesday." "Good," she said immediately. "Do not stop." For the first time all afternoon, a faint calm settled over me. Not happiness. Not revenge exactly. Just certainty. Judith studied my face for a moment before speaking again. "You know what frightens people like Vanessa most?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. Judith smiled faintly and lifted her glass of iced tea. "A woman who stops apologizing for protecting herself." I did not answer right away. I simply looked back out at the harbor where gray waves moved steadily beneath the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond those clouds, another storm was coming in from the Atlantic. And for the first time in months, I no longer felt afraid of what was ahead. The following Tuesday morning, I arrived at Martin Hale's office 10 minutes early as usual. His building overlooked Monument Square in downtown Portland, and every time I walked through those polished glass doors, I felt strangely calmer. Maybe it was because Martin never treated me like I was fragile. He treated me like someone fully capable of making decisions about her own life. His receptionist smiled warmly when I entered. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Hale is expecting you." I thanked her softly and removed my raincoat while thunder rumbled faintly outside. Maine weather in late May could never quite decide what season it wanted to be. Martin's office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, the same way it had for nearly 20 years. Framed degrees lined the walls beside old black and white photographs of Portland Harbor during winter storms. Martin stood when I entered, tall and silver-haired in his charcoal suit. "Eleanor," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "You look tired." I laughed quietly at that. Apparently everyone could see it lately. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk while I settled my purse carefully onto my lap. For a few moments, we discussed ordinary things first. The weather. Tourist season beginning soon along the coast. A seafood festival Walter and I used to attend every summer. Martin had known my husband almost as long as I had. That familiarity made difficult conversations easier somehow. Finally, he opened the thick folder resting on his desk. Colored tabs divided each section neatly. "I reviewed everything again this morning," he said carefully. "The charitable transfers are finalized. The scholarship fund paperwork has been accepted by the University of Maine. The Children's Cancer Center donation is secured, and the lake house transfer will become effective immediately upon your instruction." I nodded slowly while looking down at the documents. Everything appeared strangely small written on paper. 38 years of work reduced to signatures and legal language. Martin watched me quietly for a moment before speaking again. "You are certain about this?" he asked gently. "There is still time to reconsider portions of the estate if you wish." Outside his office windows, rain slid steadily down the glass, while pedestrians hurried across the square, carrying umbrellas against the wind. I folded my hands together carefully in my lap. Walter and I built those properties together, I said softly. Every sacrifice, every mortgage payment, every sleepless night. My throat tightened briefly before I continued. I can live with giving everything away. What I cannot live with is becoming a waiting room for someone else's inheritance. Martin's expression shifted slightly then. Not surprise. Understanding. He leaned back in his chair slowly. I need to tell you something, he said after a pause. And I debated whether or not it was appropriate. A strange chill moved through me immediately. Martin removed his glasses and set them carefully onto the desk. 3 months ago, Daniel contacted my office privately. I stared at him without speaking. He asked questions regarding estate timelines, property transition procedures, tax implications after your passing. Martin chose each word very carefully. He seemed especially interested in how quickly the lake house ownership could be transferred. The room went completely still around me. I heard only the soft ticking of the antique clock near Martin's bookshelf and the rain against the windows outside. For several seconds, I could not even look at him. Some small part of me had apparently continued hoping I misunderstood everything. Hoping Vanessa was the driving force behind all of this, while Daniel simply followed along weakly. But hearing those words stripped away the final illusion I had left. Martin's voice softened. Eleanor, I am sorry. I looked down at my wedding ring resting against the edge of the folder in front of me. Walter used to joke that Daniel inherited my heart, but his stubbornness. Somewhere over the years, that stubbornness had curdled into entitlement. And somehow I had spent too long mistaking dependence for love. I finally lifted my eyes toward Martin again. No, I said quietly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Do not be sorry. I rested my hand calmly over the signed documents in front of me. For the first time in months, I think I finally understand exactly what I need to do. After leaving Martin's office, I did something I had not done in years. I stopped trying to earn my own family's affection. The realization came quietly while I sat at a red light near Commercial Street, watching rainwater slide across my windshield in slow, crooked lines. For so long, every conversation with Daniel and Vanessa had revolved around maintaining peace. I softened disagreements. I apologized first. I ignored small insults because I convinced myself preserving family harmony mattered more than my pride. But somewhere along the way, my silence stopped being kindness and became permission. That evening, Daniel called while I was making grilled cheese and tomato soup for dinner. His name flashed across my phone screen beside a photograph taken years ago at Chloe's middle school graduation. Back then, his smile still looked genuine around me. I answered after the third ring. Hey Mom, he said warmly. Too warmly. How was your day? I stirred the soup slowly while leaning against the kitchen counter. Quiet, I replied. Rainy. Yeah, it has been ugly out there. A pause followed. Then came the real reason for the call. Vanessa and I were thinking maybe we should all spend more time together this summer. I almost smiled to myself at the timing. That sounds nice, I said gently. Actually, he continued carefully. We thought it might help if Chloe started staying at the lake house more often. You know, building memories there while she still can. While she still can. Such an innocent sentence on the surface. Yet every word underneath it carried weight. I lowered the heat beneath the soup pot and remained silent long enough for Daniel to grow uncomfortable. Mom, he asked, are you still there? I am. Another pause. Then his voice softened slightly. You know we worry about you being alone so much. There it was again. Concern wrapped carefully around control. I walked slowly toward the dining table and sat down beside the windows overlooking Casco Bay. Outside, fog drifted low over the water while sailboat masts disappeared into the gray evening sky. I have managed alone before, I said quietly. Daniel exhaled through his nose, the way he always did when frustrated as a child. That is not what I mean. I know. He hesitated again before continuing. Vanessa found a beautiful senior community outside Portland. Waterfront property, restaurants, fitness center. It honestly looks more like a resort than assisted living. I closed my eyes briefly. The brochure from my mailbox flashed through my mind immediately. Unit 214. Garden view. Blue ink circling the floor plan. That sounds lovely, I answered calmly. Daniel sounded relieved by my response. Maybe we could tour it together sometime. I let several seconds pass before answering. Perhaps. The conversation shifted after that into safer territory. Chloe's summer classes. Rising property taxes. Traffic near downtown Portland. Normal family conversation floating carefully above something much darker underneath. When we finally hung up nearly 20 minutes later, I remained seated at the table staring at the dark water outside my windows. The soup had gone cold on the stove. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. A text from Vanessa. Daniel says you seemed open to discussing future plans tonight. That makes me so happy. We only want what is best for you. I read the message twice before setting the phone face down beside me. Then I stood quietly and walked toward my office down the hallway. Inside the bottom drawer of my desk rested the leather folder containing every signed document Martin and I finalized together. I pulled it out slowly and opened it beneath the warm desk lamp glow. Scholarship funds, hospital donations, community housing grants. The final pages transferred ownership of the lake house to a coastal conservation foundation that planned to turn the property into a public retreat for grieving families. Walter would have loved that most of all. I rested my fingertips lightly against the paperwork while thunder rolled softly across the bay outside. Then, for the first time in months, I smiled without sadness. Over the next several weeks, I perfected the art of pretending nothing had changed. That turned out to be easier than I expected. People rarely question kindness when they believe it still benefits them. I answered Vanessa's texts warmly. I complimented Chloe's school photos on social media. I even agreed to host a family dinner at my condo one Friday evening near the end of June. Vanessa arrived carrying an expensive bottle of wine and one of those bakery cakes decorated with delicate sugar flowers that looked too perfect to eat. Daniel hugged me longer than usual when he walked through the door. "You look good, Mom," he said while glancing around the condo carefully, almost as if evaluating the furniture. "The place feels smaller every time I visit." I smiled faintly while setting silverware onto the dining table. That is what happens when people grow older. Vanessa immediately jumped into the opening. "Actually, Daniel and I were talking about that in the car," she said brightly. "Smaller spaces can feel safer eventually. Easier to manage." I poured iced water into crystal glasses one by one while pretending not to notice the glance they exchanged across the kitchen. Outside the windows, the evening sun stretched golden light across Casco Bay while boats drifted lazily through the harbor. Summer had finally arrived along the Maine coast, bringing warm air that smelled faintly of salt water and pine trees. Chloe wandered toward the balcony while scrolling through her phone. "Dad showed me design ideas for the lake house kitchen," she announced casually. "The white cabinets look way better." Daniel cleared his throat quickly. "We were only brainstorming." "Of course," I replied softly. Vanessa laughed lightly and reached for another dinner roll. You know how excited Chloe gets about decorating. I sat down slowly at the head of the table Walter and I bought during our 25th wedding anniversary trip to Vermont. Every scratch in the wood carried years of family dinners, birthday cakes, school projects, and Christmas mornings. Tonight, though, the table felt strangely unfamiliar beneath my hands. Daniel talked at length about rising home values near Bar Harbor, while Vanessa discussed rental potential during tourist season. They spoke carefully, always circling back toward finances without making their intentions sound obvious. But once you recognize greed, it becomes impossible to unsee. It reveals itself in small things. Lingering glances at property, questions disguised as concern, smiles that arrive half a second too late. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa set down her wine glass and sighed dramatically. "Honestly, Eleanor, you should be enjoying life more right now." "Should I?" I asked calmly. "Absolutely," she said. "Travel. Relax. Let other people handle responsibilities for once." Daniel nodded immediately beside her. "You spent your whole life taking care of everyone else." I almost laughed at the irony of that sentence. Instead, I folded my napkin carefully across my lap. "And who would handle things for me?" Vanessa smiled sweetly. "Family." The word lingered heavily in the room. Chloe remained distracted by her phone, while Daniel avoided looking directly at me again. Outside, sunset painted the harbor deep shades of orange and gold while the first stars appeared faintly above the water. For a brief moment, I imagined Walter sitting beside me at the table watching this entire performance unfold. He always noticed dishonesty faster than I did. That used to annoy me years ago. Now I understood it was wisdom. After dessert, Vanessa wandered casually through the condo while complimenting various antiques and paintings. I watched her pause slightly longer near Walter's grandfather clock and the watercolor landscape hanging above the fireplace. Inventory. That was what she was doing. Quietly taking inventory. Daniel stepped onto the balcony beside me while warm evening wind moved through the city below us. "Mom," he said carefully, "have you given any more thought to future planning?" I looked out across the darkening harbor instead of at him. "Every day," I answered truthfully. And somewhere deep inside me, I realized I no longer felt heartbreak when he disappointed me. Only distance. By early July, Daniel and Vanessa had stopped hiding their expectations completely. The change happened gradually enough that someone outside the family might never have noticed it. But once I stopped making excuses for them, every detail became impossible to ignore. Vanessa began referring to the lake house as the family property during conversations with friends. Daniel casually mentioned long-term renovation budgets over dinner as though ownership was already settled. Even Chloe started talking about inviting her classmates there after everything gets updated next year. I listened quietly every time, smiled when expected, asked polite questions about cabinet colors and dock repairs, while something inside me grew colder and calmer with each passing day. One Saturday afternoon, Vanessa invited me to lunch at an outdoor cafe near the marina in Portland. She arrived 20 minutes late wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying shopping bags from expensive boutiques downtown. "Traffic was insane," she said dramatically while kissing my cheek. "Summer tourists are everywhere already." I smiled softly and folded my napkin onto my lap, while servers moved between crowded tables carrying lobster rolls and iced cocktails beneath striped umbrellas. The harbor sparkled brightly behind her in the afternoon sun. Vanessa ordered champagne immediately. I ordered iced tea. Halfway through lunch, she leaned forward across the table, lowering her voice slightly. "Daniel has been under so much pressure lately," she said. "Work stress. Financial stress. You know how hard everything is for young families right now." I stirred lemon into my tea quietly without responding. Vanessa sighed heavily. "Sometimes I worry he pushes himself too hard trying to secure Chloe's future." There it was again. Future. Everything always circled back to the future they imagined waiting for them. "I am sure Daniel will figure things out," I replied gently. Vanessa hesitated before continuing. "Actually, we have been thinking maybe it makes sense for the lake house to stay in the family now instead of later." I lifted my eyes toward her calmly. "What do you mean?" "Nothing official," she said quickly. "Just practical planning. If ownership transferred earlier, we could begin renovations immediately and avoid future estate complications." Her tone remained light and polished, but I noticed the eagerness underneath it, the careful excitement. I took a slow sip of tea while gulls cried somewhere over the marina nearby. "That is certainly one approach," I answered softly. Vanessa relaxed instantly, mistaking my calmness for agreement. She launched into a detailed conversation about kitchen expansions, guest suites, and increasing property value over the next decade. As she spoke, I watched sunlight flash across the gold bracelet resting on her wrist. The bracelet Walter bought me during our final anniversary trip before his diagnosis. Vanessa admired it constantly after I gave it to her 2 Christmases ago. At the time, her tears looked genuine when she thanked me. Now I wondered whether gratitude and calculation had simply learned to wear the same face. After lunch, Vanessa insisted we walk through nearby antique shops together before heading home. Inside one crowded little store near the harbor, she paused in front of an old oil painting showing a lighthouse along the Maine coast. "This would look beautiful in the lake house dining room," she said absent-mindedly. "Not your lake house. Not Eleanor's house. Simply the lake house." I stood beside her quietly studying the painting while tourists drifted through narrow aisles around us. Somewhere behind us, an old Frank Sinatra song played softly through dusty ceiling speakers. "You really love that house," I said after a moment. Vanessa smiled warmly without realizing the trap hidden inside the sentence. "Honestly," she admitted, "I already think of it as home." I nodded once, very slowly. Then I looked back toward the lighthouse, painting hanging beneath warm